Well, good evening and welcome to this 5-week midsummer class course experience as we continue our Faith Connection series, but with a shift to what I have termed a seriously fun look at America's national pastime. I suppose you've heard the news this morning that we will, it looks like, have a Major League Baseball season after all. It's been described as a 60-game sprint as opposed to the 163-game marathon that we're accustomed to. And I'm hoping that the Washington Nationals can have the second half of their season in this foreshortened one this year. So spring training is scheduled to start a week from tomorrow on July 1st. And the first game is planned for the end of July. But between now and then, I plan to be here on Wednesday evenings at 7 o'clock to have some fun thinking and learning about baseball and what America's favorite pastime has to do with Christian faith and our relationship with God. And so, as we begin, we're going to look this week at the Church of Baseball. And I trust that by the time we get to the end, you'll understand why I've called our first time together by this title. If you're watching tonight, it's likely that you've had some kind of history with baseball. You're a fan. You're probably a Nationals fan. Well, maybe you're an Orioles fan, maybe both. As for myself, I became a Nationals fan when I moved here, but I must confess that I am congenitally a fan of the Chicago Cubs. That's where I was born and raised in a northern suburb, and I really didn't have any choice in the matter. Maybe you're a season ticket holder, and if you are, I'm sorry, this has probably been a difficult time for you. Many of us, though, regardless of our allegiances or how often we go to the games, played this game when we were young. Maybe you were on a Little League team. I was. I imagine a few of you, at least watching, played this game competitively in some league or another. Could have been high school or college, semi-pro, or even professional baseball. And some of you have been coaches. Maybe you've had other involvement in the sport. In one of the various other ends of the business. You're just a booster. And I suppose it's possible that some of you who are watching have never really had anything to do with baseball, but you're either with somebody who wanted to watch it, or you're just curious what baseball and the Christian gospel might have to do with each other. Most of us, I hope, have fond memories of baseball. My earliest memories of playing any sport, of any game outside, were when I was a kid playing baseball. We had a pretty large backyard. It was an odd-shaped lot with a downward slope. And my grandmother used to spend the summers with us. She was a first-grade teacher in Des Moines, Iowa, but when the school year was out, she would come and visit us, and she'd spend several weeks every summer. And when I got old enough to hold a bat up, we went out into the backyard, and maybe it was a plastic bat and a wiffle ball. I can't really remember. But Nana would pitch the ball to me, not particularly well, and I would do my best to hit it, and my father was in the outfield trying to catch whatever it is that I hit. And then when it came time to actually join an organized sports league, it was Little League Baseball. That was the first organized sport I ever participated in. By the time I got to middle school, my focus had changed to football, but that's another story. Baseball, I've seen it, can evoke strong emotions in people, maybe in you. Discussions of baseball can make our tempers flare or make us wistful of one more season that got away. There's been lots of emotions around baseball this year. We've heard how players are upset about not getting their full salaries. They've been negotiating to receive more per game because they're playing a third or two-thirds fewer. And owners are concerned that their games will be played to empty stadiums, and it will reduce their incomes. And some are just fed up with the whole thing. But memories are notoriously selective, and it seems that an awful lot are just glad about the news that we heard today. Breathing easier, looking forward to a season, even if it is quite a bit shorter. At least one sports writer has said that this will definitely be the season that we will remember, 2020. Maybe it will be called baseball's pandemic season. I don't know. Well, here's the plan. Each week, I want us to explore a chapter or a theme from the history of baseball, which is to say, a subchapter of, or a subperiod of American history. And I also want us to explore the Christian faith as we find it in American history, as we find it personally, and in our relationship with God. And I think we'll see that baseball evokes this in different forms. So my plan is to utilize parts of the great documentary on the history of baseball. You may have seen it, you may know about it, by Ken Burns, which aired in 1994. It's interesting, in 1994, that was the year that a players' strike resulted in an abrupt end to baseball. There were no playoffs or World Series that year. And so tonight we will be looking especially at the history of the game, the origins of baseball, through a lot of these clips. Not because the season was foreshortened, but because it hasn't started yet. And Ken Burns is here to help us again. For the Love of the Game is a 1999 movie starring Kevin Costner. He plays Billy Chappell, an aging star pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. He grew up in that town, and in his 18 years in the major leagues, he has never played anywhere else. Billy is now faced in this scene with whether or not he should retire or be traded to a different team. And this is the opening scene of the movie, and the owner reflects on the decision that he has unknowingly forced on his greatest player when he decided to sell the team, and on how baseball has changed over the many years of their lives. Let's watch.
Everything's changed, Billy. The players, the fans, TV rights, and arbitrations isn't the same. The game stinks. And I can't be a part of it anymore.
Perhaps you've had similar feelings about the way this game has changed, especially this year when the season, at least almost, didn't happen because disagreements between players and owners. And that's a reality. But I would submit that there is a longer-term reflection on America's favorite pastime that's worth considering. In the first of several of the clips that I will show from Ken Burns' epic special on baseball, we hear the case that there is something very special about this game. Let's watch.
It's fun. That's what it is. It's fun. Baseball is more fun than anything else. You can watch it and just love it. You enjoy it. I don't think there's anything tremendously philosophical about it. I don't think there's anything metaphysical. I just think it's so much fun to watch. You watch a player do something. You watch a second baseman go up in the air on a double play, and he throws the ball, and he's like a bird in flight, and he's watching to see what happened. You see a first baseman take a bad throw in the dirt and come up with it like that and sort of wander off the bag as if there's no problem at all. It's just delightful.
Well, that was some scene. I've seen it so many times. I still love it. I'm going to suggest that there is more to baseball, though, than just the pure fun of it. In fact, with apologies to Sports Illustrated's Robert Creamer, I think there is indeed something metaphysical even, something enigmatic, paradoxical about the game. Indeed, the significance of baseball for America, for each of us, whether we know it or not, is hard to deny. And by way of illustration, a couple of the more nostalgic clips from Ken Burns' early history of baseball. Let's watch.
It is played everywhere, in parks and playgrounds and prison yards, in back alleys and farmers' fields, by small boys and old men, raw amateurs and millionaire professionals. It is a leisurely game that demands blinding speed. The only game in which the defense has the ball. It follows the seasons, beginning each year with the fond expectancy of springtime and ending with the hard facts of autumn. Americans have played baseball for more than 200 years. While they conquered a continent, warred with one another and with enemies abroad, struggled over labor and civil rights, and the meaning of freedom. At its heart lie mythic contradictions, a pastoral game born in crowded cities, an exhilarating democratic sport that tolerates cheating and has excluded as many as it has included. A profoundly conservative game that often manages to be years ahead of its time. It is an American odyssey that links sons and daughters to fathers and grandfathers. And it reflects a host of age-old American tensions between workers and owners, scandal and reform, the individual and the collective. It is a haunted game in which every player is measured against the ghosts of all who have gone before. Most of all, it is about time and timelessness, speed and grace, failure and loss, imperishable hope, and coming home.
Here's a pitch, it's a slow curve low, and the babe swings. It's a long run. It's in there. Another home run for the Bambino. So the babe hits his second homer of the day.
So the last time that baseball had an uninterrupted season was indeed 1994, or an interrupted season rather. And that September was when Ken Burns' series began to play. And many tuned in Ken Burns' epic documentary because the World Series was not airing. In some ways, it ended up being the ironic substitute for the World Series that year. And Burns' special sought, among many things, to show that America's game has a universal scope. Let's watch this.
Beautiful, foul ball. Stay there, stay there.
The game's greatest figures have come from everywhere. Coal mines and college campuses, city slums and country crossroads. a brawling Irish immigrant son who for more than half a century preached a rough, scrambling brand of baseball in which anything went so long as victory was won. And his favorite player, a college-educated right-hander so uniformly virtuous that millions of schoolboys worshiped him as the Christian gentleman. And a flamboyant federal judge who first helped save baseball from a scandal that threatened to destroy it, and then became an implacable enemy of reform. A miner's son from Commerce, Oklahoma, who made himself the game's most powerful switch hitter despite 17 seasons of ceaseless pain. And a tight-fisted Methodist, a cross, one sports writer said, between a statistician and an evangelist, who profoundly changed the game twice. And there were those whose true greatness was never fully measured because of the stubborn prejudice that permeated both the nation and its favorite game. Two of baseball's best began life in rural Georgia, a swift, savage competitor who may have been the greatest player of all time, but whose uncontrollable rage in the end made him more enemies than friends. And another no less fierce competitor who, because he managed to hold his temper, made professional baseball a truly national pastime more than a century after it was born. And then there was the Baltimore saloon keeper's turbulent son, who became the best known and best loved athlete in American history.
Indeed, baseball is deeply embedded in the history of our country. It's wrapped up in what historians identify as our perplexing relationship to history as Americans. So many of us love history, but only as it is selectively told and cited. We look back at great moments like 1776, Washington crossing the Delaware, Paul Revere's ride. We're not too clear about the parts in between, but we know the important main events. Interesting, all of the parts that get left out, the names that are not mentioned. Baseball's 19th century promoters benefited from this propensity for selective historical recall as they put the game on the map. And the result ended up being, as we'll see, a uniquely American game. Which leads us to the question of, well, where did baseball actually come from? When was the first game? So let's take a historical look at the origins of baseball, again, with the help of Ken Burns. It's hard to tell exactly, to pinpoint where baseball got started, but it is somewhere in the primordial soup of bats and balls and broods of children. Let's watch.
1744. The ball once struck off, away flies the boy to the next destined post, and then home with joy.
Children have hit balls with bats as long as there have been children. But baseball's most direct ancestors were two British games: rounders, a children's sport brought to New England by the earliest colonists, and cricket, a stately pastime divided into innings and supervised by umpires. By the time of the American Revolution, there were many variations. Boys played one version or another in schoolyards and village greens and on college campuses.
1786. A fine day. Play ball in the campus, but am beaten, for I miss catching and striking the ball. Princeton College.
Of all baseball's ancestors, town ball was by far the most popular. Under its rules, the infield was square. 8 to 15 men played on a side, sometimes as many as 50. The pitcher or feeder was the least important player. It was his job to lob the ball to the striker, who could wait and wait for the pitch he wanted. The runner was out if the ball was caught on the fly, or if he was soaked, hit with the ball while running between bases. By 1800, town ball and its many variations were played nearly everywhere. On their way back from the Pacific Ocean, Lewis and Clark played a game of base with the Nez Perce Indians as they prepared to cross the Bitterroot Mountains. In the 1830s, on the western frontier of Missouri, ball was the favorite sport of Joseph Smith, the founder of a new religious sect called the Mormons. But back east in Cooperstown, New York, city fathers passed an ordinance restricting play after merchants complained about too many broken windows. Meanwhile, in New York City, they were starting to play a brand new version of the game.
Originally, the rules of base and ball varied by region. It was the establishment of the New York Knickerbockers baseball team that helped to standardize the rules of the game. Let's watch.
Baseball was an urban game almost from the beginning. Organized ball was played by men in cities near saloons.
In the 1840s, New Yorkers walked and worked and lived at what was called a railroad pace. For the thousands of single men pouring into the city in search of work, their crowded world centered around boarding houses and saloons, volunteer fire companies and ward politics, and baseball teams. In September of 1845, as Americans now claimed the right to overspread the whole of the continent, a group of friends formed the New York Knickerbocker Baseball Club. They were merchants, brokers, insurance salesmen, a United States Marshal, a portrait photographer, a dealer in cigars. And they showed a lively interest in improving the game.
3 balls being struck at and missed, and the last one caught is a hand out. If not caught, is considered fair, and the striker bound to run. Alexander Joy Cartwright.
Alexander Joy Cartwright was a volunteer fireman and bank clerk working for Daniel Ebbets, the father of the man who would one day build Ebbets Field. He helped establish the Knickerbockers and codify new rules that would change the game forever. The infield would now be diamond-shaped. Foul lines were established, and the batter got 3 missed swings before he was called out. Most important, runners would now be tagged or thrown out, not thrown at. It was now a more challenging game, faster paced, American, and to the Knickerbockers' great delight, quite distinct from cricket and rounders.
As baseball grew in popularity, teams popped up everywhere, and the rules continued to evolve. Yet, in a mysterious way that just could betray the hand of Providence, we'll see that they evolved in a very intelligent direction and in just the right way. There's one more clip I want to show you in this series. Let's watch that now.
The Knickerbockers continued to refine their game. The winning team was the first to get 21 aces, or runs, soon changed to whoever was ahead at the end of 9 innings. They standardized the number of men who could play on a side at 9 and set the bases 90 feet apart.
That's so interesting that it would come out 90 feet. That somebody sat down, Mr. Cartwright or whoever, and said, hey, it ought to be 90 feet. It just sounded like a logical number. The fact of the matter is, in retrospect, if it were 88 feet, the game would be very different. Think of the plays at first base. Think of the double plays that wouldn't be completed on an 88-foot first base. And second base. If it were 94 feet, we'd be throwing people out all over the place. Batting averages would drop remarkably. So if 90 feet was something somebody said, hey, that's a good number, that was a pick from heaven.
John Montgomery Ward published a popular guidebook, Base-Ball, How to Become a Player. In the introduction, he discussed baseball's origins and how it grew to be America's national pastime. I believe, he wrote, and you can read this along with me, I believe it to be the fruit of the inventive genius of the American boy. Like our system of government, it is an American evolution, and while like that it has doubtless been affected by foreign associations, it is nonetheless distinctively our own. Place in the hands of a youth a ball, and they will invent games of ball. For Ward, baseball's early inception did not depend on cricket or rounders. Rather, it was due to the initiative of American youth. There was the origin. Albert Goodwill Spaulding learned about the game of baseball from a returning Civil War veteran in 1863. Following his brief career as a player, he became the game's first great promoter, and probably the one to first make a lot of money from baseball. You'll recognize him as the founder of the major sporting goods company by his name. And I think that the name Spaulding is still on most of the baseballs that are used in competitive games. It was Spaulding who gave baseball its ultimate sense of epic and mythic beginnings. Let's watch this.
One summer day in 1839 at Cooperstown, New York, on the shores of Lake Otsego, the local academy was playing a game of town ball against Green's Select School. The rules of town ball were so loose that every hit was fair, and boys sometimes ran headlong into one another. That day, an academy player named Abner Doubleday sat down and on the spot drew up the rules for a brand new game and called it baseball. Abner Doubleday would eventually become a hero at the Battle of Gettysburg, and his game would become the national pastime, or so the legend has it. Abner Doubleday really was a distinguished soldier, but he was at West Point, not Cooperstown that summer, never claimed to have had anything to do with baseball, may never have even seen a professional game. Baseball's real history is more complicated. Albert Goodwill Spaulding, the sporting goods king, could look back on a long career in baseball, first as a superb pitcher, then as a ruthless club owner, finally as the man who had made the game big business. But he still had one more service to perform. He was determined to prove that baseball was an exclusively American invention, the brainchild of some ingenious American lad. He appointed a commission to prove it, but 2 years of research turned up almost nothing. Then, in 1905, a letter arrived from a frail old man who claimed that General Abner Doubleday had invented baseball as a boy in Cooperstown, New York, one afternoon in 1839. It wasn't true, but it was just what Spalding had been looking for. It proved, he said, that baseball truly was the national game. Played by Americans, watched by Americans, now invented by an American.
We need Doubleday because, as a culture, we have to have origin myths. Now, baseball has no point of origin. It evolved. We know that. So they set up a commission, and they ginned up this absurd story about Abner Doubleday, who, as one writer said, probably didn't know a baseball from a kumquat, but he did fire the first responsive Union volley at Fort Sumter, and he did briefly command the troops at Gettysburg. So to have an American hero as the originator of the game seemed very appropriate indeed. It's total mythology. In fact, there is no single point of origin.
Let's not try to find a starting place for baseball. Let's consider it to be the Darwinian product of centuries of movement of people and continents and oceans, and something rising from the sea and then turning eventually after years of evolution into Barry Bonds.
So where baseball came from, how it developed, and how it got to the point of being so much a part of the warp and woof of America is a mystery. It's unclear, and I don't think we'll ever know. But now, with Spalding's compelling creation story, a sacred place of origin in Cooperstown, Albert Goodwill Spalding had a cause. He became the great evangelist of baseball. He sent baseball missionaries around the world to introduce America's game to the recreationally heathen. They played in Australia, Egypt, in the shadow of the Great Pyramids, Italy, and France, concluding with a series of exhibition games in Great Britain. Now there is a mission trip for you. Baseball would come to have a sacred vocation in this country. Baseball would fight against the corrupting influences of gamblers, keeping itself pure, just as America and Americans were at heart pure. Because it was the call of baseball to form and shape the youth of our nation, discipling young men and women to become responsible citizens and leaders of tomorrow. That was baseball's role. The great sport nurtured people in all the characteristics and qualities that go to make the American man and woman the most highly organized, civilized being on earth. That by Francis Richter, editor of Sporting Life. Baseball represented the soul of America. It was taking on the characteristics of religion. Baseball had become more than just a game. It came to be understood as an institution that embodied the very characteristics, virtues, and aspirations of America. Baseball is more than a historical piece of interest. It is intrinsic to the story of who we are. Former commissioner of Major League Baseball, Bart Giamatti, wrote suggesting a foundational relationship between baseball and the core values of American culture. In his 1989 book, Take Time for Paradise. If you examine the words closely, and I'm going to read them to you, to know baseball is to continue to aspire to the condition of freedom, individually and as a people. For baseball is grounded in America in a way unique to our games. Unique, one of a kind. Baseball is part of America's plot, part of America's mysterious underlying design, the plot in which we all conspire and collude, the plot of the story of our national life. Our national plot is to be free enough to consent to an order that will enhance and compound as it constrains our freedom. That is our grounding, our national story, the tale America tells the world. So if you examine these words, Giamatti, a man who gave up a career as a distinguished Renaissance scholar and Ivy League University president for a different career in the establishment of organized baseball, here Giamatti extols the virtues not only of baseball, he's lauding the virtue of America itself. He is articulating an understanding, a vision that baseball accentuates unique American values, such as personal liberty, collective freedom. We learn that from baseball, he says. In so many words, for Giamatti, baseball embodies what scholars call civil religion. Very simply, a civil religion is something that's created by bestowing sacred meaning on a secular symbol. So, if the flag or the Star-Spangled Banner takes on, they become objects of worship of some kind, if they're elevated up to the same level as religion, and they often are, then that is a form of civil religion. That's just an example. We could say more about it, but we won't tonight. And so baseball came to be seen, at least by Giamatti as well as others, as a sacred sign and a symbol for all that is noble and virtuous in the American experience, which is to say that baseball is more than a sport, more than a historical piece of interest. It is, as Giamatti wrote, part of America's plot, intrinsic to the story of who we are. New York Governor Mario Cuomo went so far as to say that baseball actually had a sacred Judeo-Christian vocation. Let's watch this.
It is a community activity. You need all 9 people helping one another. I love bunt plays. I love the idea of the bunt. I love the idea of the sacrifice. Even the word is good. Giving yourself up for the good of the whole. That's Jeremiah. That's thousands of years of wisdom. You find your own good in the good of the whole. You find your own individual fulfillment in the success of the community. That the Bible tried to do that and didn't teach you. Baseball did.
Well, that's quite a claim. Baseball can do what the Bible can't. There is much that I am tempted to say in response to that statement, but I won't. I'll only observe that what an interesting thing for Governor Cuomo to say. But if we look back at the history of baseball, there were certain players who embodied the Christian faith. One in particular we meet in this next clip. Let's watch.
In 1900, the Giants had taken a huge risk and traded their greatest pitcher, Amos Rusi, for a 19-year-old rookie. Rusi had 245 wins behind him, and as it turned out, none ahead of him. The Hoosier Thunderbolt went back to digging ditches in Indiana. The rookie had no major league wins when he joined the team, but he had 373 ahead of him. His name was Christy Mathewson.
Matty was without a peer. He had a greater variety of stuff than any pitcher I ever knew or handled. His fastball was the equal of Walter Johnson's or Amos Rusi's. He had the fadeaway down to perfection, and he utilized his knowledge of batsmen with greater effect than any twirler in the game. He possessed wonderful control, remarkable fielding ability, and was one of the finest sportsmen the game has ever known. John McGraw.
John McGraw may have championed the old brawling brand of baseball, but his greatest star was Christy Mathewson, a pitcher with a record for clean play so spotless that his wife once felt she had to defend him by saying that while he was a good man, he was no goody-goody.
Christy Mathewson was Frank Merriwell in the flesh. He was so virtuous, he would not give interviews to sports writers who he heard cheated on their wives.
Small boys had admired other players. They worshipped Christy Mathewson. He was the perfect hero for his age. He seemed to have sprung from the pages of the dime baseball novels American boys now devoured. Sports writers and fans across the country called him the Christian gentleman. No one did more to improve the reputation of the baseball player, and he did it with style.
Matheson would always wait until just about 10 minutes before game time. Then he'd come in from the clubhouse across the field in a long linen duster like auto drivers wore in those days. And at every step, the crowd will yell louder and louder.
And so at the center of all of these ideas is the notion that somehow baseball is going to redeem America, that it will enable us through the playing and the watching and the participation in this game, it will enable us to serve, actually baseball itself will then serve as a light to the nations. There are many films, and this is by way of preview of what we'll be looking at in some of the weeks to come as we wrap up tonight. Field of Dreams, The Natural, A League of Their Own, Angels in the Outfield, Bull Durham. Oops, that's all I have. But also others, Summer Catch, Stealing Home, Trouble with the Curve. All are about the redemption of their characters. And baseball is at the heart of it. Most every baseball movie that I've watched is about the main character, someone, receiving redemption by the end of the film. Perhaps the most abundant evidence of baseball's success in the way that it has found its way into popular culture, perhaps the greatest evidence of baseball's success is the way that it's found its way into popular culture. We think of there being great green cathedrals with organ music. You've been to them, and look at them. They're filled with pews, rows of pews. This vast American family attends the same church. There is a hymnody of familiar tunes that everyone knows. They don't have to hand out the words to the game, to the songs that we play when we go to the game. We've been learning them since we were children. Everybody knows these, and we know how to clap our hands to them. There are distinctive robes and vestments worn by the clerics whose eyes command the attention of the vast throngs in the congregation as they preside over the game. And there are vast liturgies, which the faithful love to hear over and over again, to witness. Batting practice, the first pitch of the season, the seventh inning stretch, the bottom of the ninth, extra innings, the trip around the bases when you hit it out of the park. In closing, I would say that there is plenty of evidence that there is indeed a church of baseball. But don't take my word for it. Listen to Annie Savoy.
I believe in the Church of Baseball. I've tried all the major religions and most of the minor ones. I've worshipped Buddha, Allah, Brahma, Vishnu, Siva, trees, mushrooms, and Isadora Duncan. I know things. For instance, there are 108 beads in a Catholic rosary, and there are 108 stitches in a baseball. When I learned that, I gave Jesus a chance. But it just didn't work out between us. The Lord laid too much guilt on me. I prefer metaphysics to theology. You see, there's no guilt in baseball, and it's never boring. I've tried them all, I really have. And the only church that truly feeds the soul day in, day out is the Church of Baseball.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us online tonight for the Gospel According to Baseball. And I want to offer you an opportunity to join a virtual small group. We have dozens of groups that meet at different times during the week at National Presbyterian Church. And all of these groups have had to go online, and many are using the Zoom meeting platform. We have a couple of groups that are meeting on Wednesday nights, and at least one of them is planning to talk about the material that we present here each week. So you might want to give this a try. You don't have to sign up forever. It could last just a month or so during the Gospel According to Baseball. If you would like to try a small group, then please send an email to athompson@nationalpress.org. You can see Amy's email address on the screen, and it's also available on the church website. She coordinates our small groups, and she would be happy to work with you to find one to be in. And if you would like to comment, the one thing that I really am sorry about is that this is an empty room, and I can't see your faces, and I can't hear your comments or respond to anything you might say. So if you would like to make a comment, then send an email to grow@nationalpress.org and put baseball in the subject heading of the email, and then I'll have a chance to take a look and see what you're having to say and possibly incorporate responses into the weeks ahead. Thanks again for joining us. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening, and take care.